Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on thriving in fast-changing times. Hosted by TKS, the consulting house, a business advisory to real estate, hospitality, and leisure sectors based out of Dubai, and by ChangeQuest, an accredited training provider of change management, project management, and people skills development. My name is Mirka Vavrova. I'm a consultant at TKS, the consulting house, and personally I'm very passionate about helping organizations launch into new spheres. I am going to facilitate this webinar, and I have two speakers with me today. Our first speaker is Stacy Kurtzendorfer. She's senior consultant at TKS, the consulting house, and an expert in organizational effectiveness and transformation. Our second speaker is Ranjit Sidhu. She's director at ChangeQuest, which she founded 10 years ago to help people learn how to bridge the gap between the process side of delivering projects and bringing people along. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. The aim of this webinar is to address the transformational landscape in the Middle East and to discuss some specific tools people can use to tackle some of the most common issues in the transformational projects. We have collected some of your questions prior to this event, which we will address during the webinar, and I also encourage all of you to post questions during this event. We will be collecting them and addressing them towards the end. So let's start. Stacey, why don't you tell us your take on the subject?
Well, thank you very much, Mirka, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and greetings to those of you who have dialed into the webinar. We're excited to be here, and one of the reasons why we decided to host the webinar is we thought very deeply about what are some of the specific challenges that companies face in implementing transformation efforts, not only in the Middle East, but in the UK and other areas. In particular, in the Middle East, we will touch on some of these challenges, which may be common to some of our other listeners out there. But there are specific issues that we face, which is actually indicated in the content description of the course. In the Middle East, and especially in Dubai and the Emirates, we have a very multicultural workforce, and people have very different attitudes towards change. One culture may experience change or transformation differently from another culture, and the company culture will in turn have an impact on how different cultures experience change. So it's quite a complicated mix, which is unique in particular to this area, but also in the UK there is a very multicultural workforce. Very often there is a mix of leadership styles. In particular in the Middle East, many of the workforces are used to being managed in a more hierarchical way and maybe are moving to a less hierarchical type of structure. Another issue that is interesting for us in the Middle East is the need always to produce results quite quickly. Now any CEO will ask you for, let's not say instant, but quick results. However, we need to reinforce the understanding that transformation is a journey and it's not just an event. And so this actually links with the last point, which is how do we sustain those project results that we had to achieve when there are internal and external changes in the environment. So let's actually move on to the agenda for the next hour. What we're going to talk about is what is business transformation and how does this connect with managing change. We'll take a very brief look at how these transformations can be achieved. We will only touch on the basic methodology in the interest of time. We'll look at how communication, engagement, and knowledge transfer can act as catalysts in this process. And as Mirka mentioned, we are going to look at some of your questions. So if there are any additional questions as mentioned, please feel free to put those forward. Now, usually when we look at implementing change efforts, we start with some kind of a project. And so let's talk about what is business transformation. There are different types of business transformation. There can be an operational type of transformation where you decide to optimize the environment. There could be a core transformation, which is doing what you do but delivered in a very different way, or even a strategic transformation where you change the essence of your company. However, at some level, business transformation is really ensuring that the business has the capacity to continue achieving its vision, mission, and goals, despite all of these internal and external challenges it may be facing. So usually there will be a change to how business is conducted to increase revenue and market share or reduce operating costs, improve customer satisfaction, and so on. And there are different ways in which this business transformation can be achieved. So at some level, you are looking at a project which connects with the need to change, either triggered by internal or external factors. And for those of you who are project managers out there, you know that you will have to take a very close look and ensure that you manage time, quality, and cost, and that there is no scope creep on the project. Now, all of these elements are very important, but we need to balance these with additional elements, which is the human factor. And this is where change management comes in on a project. So when we look at managing people during the process of change, we have to remember that people are not rational robots. And there's a cute little cartoon here which explains that the very well laid out rational point, notwithstanding all the facts and figures, this person still holds on to their emotional opinion no matter which facts or evidence are presented. And this is very much a phenomenon connected with change management. If you do not support people during change, or they don't understand why changes are being made, they will still have the same viewpoints that they had prior to the initiation of the project, and you will not achieve lasting results. Looking at a very basic change management overview, what we're looking at is what is the project. So touching on what the project might be. Maybe it's redesigning business processes or realigning the way the company works. Perhaps it's some kind of innovation process or initiative. Very often, and this is quite common in the Middle East, people talk about, I want to change my organizational culture. But this is a long-term undertaking, and at some level will involve a lot of other changes to the company as well. Or perhaps the company wants to become more customer-focused, which in turn will lead to increasing revenues and so on. So you've defined your project. That is always the first step. What is the project? Maybe you have a name for it, maybe you don't. Maybe it's an SAP implementation. Regardless, there is a reason why these changes are being made, and they will be connected with business reasons, which most likely will reduce in increasing revenues, increasing profits, decreasing costs, improving customer satisfaction. The point is that people have to understand, why are we changing? And if that initial step is not taken, even with all the technical successes on your project, you will not deliver the lasting results. The next step is looking at what we are changing. Now, usually, if you jump to the last point, which is in yellow, if you think about what percentage of people have to change the way that they work, so who will be changing, it will be close to 100%. People cannot do their work the same way and have, at the same time, a successful change management initiative. And this is where the 70% statistic about most projects failing in terms of achieving their objectives comes in, because people focus purely on the technical side of the project. So the end result of that question is how? How are people moved along with the change? So if you look at the next slide, we're looking at an initial state. Now, let's say that we want to have an employee who is connected with the company culture. This is what you see on the bottom right-hand side. And we're all in the same state, which is the initial state, whether there is no change management or good change management or change management coupled with engagement. So everyone's at the same phase. But if you think about what will happen in the event of some kind of transformation, which we've already detailed could be for any number of reasons. Let's say you want to redesign business processes and at the same time improve customer or guest satisfaction. There will be a transformation, but you will notice that many of the employees will not be moved along with the company culture. And the goal of any change management initiative really is to have an increase on adoption. What adoption means is that people are comfortable using the new technology or the new ways of working and can embrace new ways of working. So in this first example, you see that there was a change and there might have been some adoption, but many employees were left behind in the process. If you look at the second state, where there is good change management applied, and what we mean by good change management is we mean good project management, the technical side of change, but we also mean visible and executive sponsorship. And on the third level, we mean providing a sufficient number of change management resources and a structure to enable the change or transformation to occur. So what you will see in this next cloud phase is that many employees will have moved along and they would have been catalyzed by this change to the culture. But you're still left behind, potentially, because you have not used engagement as a catalyst. So in our view, engagement is a critical catalyst which unifies the messages, particularly if we take the Middle East where we have so many different cultures. People will get mixed messages about what is communicated. And it's nobody's fault, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just a phenomenon of so many different cultures working together. And what we want to do is actually unify the message and consolidate the information first through things like visual tools, storytelling. You see a lot of Lego master workshops on LinkedIn now, and this is one way of actually getting people on the same page in terms of a message. So once we've concentrated the message and we have given consistent information about what it is that we're trying to change and engage people in the process of making change, you will notice that employees move along with the company culture and you have longer lasting results in terms of change management. So why is engagement so important? I will just touch on this before moving the show over to Ranjit. Well, there have been many proven studies and a lot of organizations which have told us that organizations which engage and involve their employees see at least 10% higher rates of customer satisfaction, however that happens to be measured, whether by a survey or testimonials or a net promoter score, and 22% higher profits. This is the so-called service profit chain, where we know that starting with leadership and engaging our employees in turn leads to them doing their job better, which in turn leads to brand loyalty, which in turn leads to higher profits. So this is a very effective mechanism and a very critical part of change management. All right, at this stage, in case there are any questions coming through, I will pass over the baton to Ranjit, who will pick it up from here.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Stacey. And hi, everyone. Really pleased to be here. So, engaging people, incorporating the change management approach is really important. And the slide that you see here is about, assessing the level of impact of change on the organization. I mean, these are just some factors to take into account when thinking about your approach to managing this change and the extent of the impact. So the factors that come in are, well, what is the change ability of the organization at the moment? How much know-how is there around change? How much appetite is there for them to be thinking about change management? Or is it more a case of, well, look, we want this to happen, when can we get results? That's it, deliver task-focused results without really taking the time to think about the people side of things. Now, the history of the organization plays a big factor too. And it really always interests me, when you walk into an organization or you walk around listening to people in different areas of the business, and what sort of stories are they talking about? What is it that they're saying, that happened in the organization, and how far back does that go? There's one organization that I've worked with here where they still talk about the big change that happened about 15 years ago, and the impact that had on them. Whereas other companies I go in and change is just the norm, every 6 months they seem to be reinventing themselves. So how much, are they, what sort of pace are they used to, and how has the change actually been implemented in the past? Was it something that was a really painful process? It was done poorly? So they're carrying all of that history and negative connotations around the change with them. So it's worth keeping that in mind. And also the culture of the organisation. I mean, that plays a big element, because ultimately anything we do with delivering project, with delivering change, we are doing it within the context of that environment and of that culture. So our approach to managing it is going to be informed by the culture that we're working in. And again, is it, one of where it's very top-down, hierarchical, everything has to go through certain layers? Is it very risk-averse type culture? So some companies I work with here, they, whether it's the nuclear industry or power generation industry, they are very cautious, and safety is a critical element of that. Now, in an environment like that, introducing new concepts, experimenting, yes, it's done. I'm not saying it isn't done, but we just have to remember about how to get approval for that and how do people become comfortable with that that sort of way of working. So the culture comes into it. And of course, the type and nature of change. Are we talking about the global company-wide systems implementation? Are we talking about deeper transformation? I mean, same as what Stacey was talking about. Is it more of a strategic transformation? Is it downsizing, efficiency, saving? Are they going to have to rationalize, lose people, or consolidate and move somewhere, relocate into one building? So thinking about the nature of the change is also going to affect your approach. And within that, also, the individual, so at the more local level, what type of workforce have we got? Whether it's a generational thing, or what type of workforce is it in terms of how they are likely to respond? So all of these factors come into play as part of your preparation for planning your change management and also the approach that you're going to take to it in the first place. Moving on to the next slide, this is really just thinking about, again, it's more to be aware of that where is the anxiety coming from? Yes, it does take longer. It causes stress. It causes anxiety, because when we are introducing change of any sort, we are asking people to do things in a different way, whether it's new processes, working on a new system. They are having to do something different from the norm, and that basically takes them out of their comfort zone. And when somebody is in their comfort zone, they're basically in autopilot mode. They've got that unconscious incompetence. Just think about the work that you do on a daily basis. The version of Word that you're using on your machine, and it's familiar, it's comfortable. You can be doing it in autopilot. As soon as that changes, all of a sudden you need more brain energy, more thinking power, or to pay more attention, because suddenly that version of Word has changed. And what you could do really quickly, putting page numbers in the document, all of a sudden they've changed the function and it takes a bit more thought. And isn't it always the case that this type of stuff happens when you're under pressure, there's loads to do, you haven't got time to spend worrying about how do I do it, you just want to get on with getting the job done. So that's where a lot of the anxiety can come from, because it takes more energy and thinking through. You have to consciously think about what it is that you need to do. And, the first step is actually realizing that there is something here that I don't know. I've become aware now that there is something lacking. I don't understand the system or the new processes or the new way we're going to do things. You then build that know-how through effort and become conscious, have that conscious competence, until it becomes the norm. You practice it, you do it, you build that skill, and then you get it in the muscle, and now suddenly it's the new skill that you're in autopilot mode again. So you're going from, I know how to do my job comfortably, to, oh my goodness, I have new things to learn. Alert. So need to put more effort into this. and then you're starting to make progress, but it still takes effort until it becomes in the muscle. So those middle stages require the more effort and thinking, and that's where you get the performance dip. So it is inevitable that what you could do really quickly before, when it's changed and you're learning, it's going to take you longer. That might sound like a really simple concept, but let's just think about how we do the planning for our project. And, when there is any change going on, typically what happens is we have our implementation plans. We then want to engage users. We want to, get more people involved and invite them along to workshops to have their say and have their input, or read this, and there's extra stuff that, we put on the internet that they have to then read about. We're asking them to do all of these extra activities on top of their day job. This is at a time when their performance is going to dip anyway, and we're piling more work on them and expecting them to be okay with it. And then, so this is one of the reasons that it does cause the stress and the anxiety. So factoring that into our planning, into the timescales, can make a big difference. We have to accept that whereas under normal circumstances, this might take a week or two to implement, that actually when we're introducing all these new changes and people have got this extra work to do, then it's inevitably going to take longer. Now, that's not the sort of news that your sponsors want to hear, but you've then got to remind them, from what we've seen on the slides already, is, well, if we don't get that engagement, people aren't going to adopt and embrace the thing that's being delivered anyway. We won't realise the benefits. So how much is the real cost of that versus spending longer up front, engaging people in the process and giving them time to be more involved in it? So that's something to keep in mind. Moving on to the next slide. So thinking about planning for communication and engagement. Very, very simple representation here, really. This is the journey that we can take people on. And as part of your planning the change and planning the engagement with the stakeholders, you're needing to think about where is it that you need to get them to. In many cases, there will be some people, say on the periphery, where actually it is enough to just keep them informed. But typically we usually want them to do more than that. We don't just want to keep them informed. We actually need them to sit up and take notice, get curious and say, so how does that actually impact me? Get enthusiastic about that, and then, motivated enough to actually get up and do something to get involved and get engaged with the change. And then what we've got here, examples, so on the next bit, where, examples might be online discussion forums where people can actually get engaged to find out more information and talk to people, have dialogue, large meetings, team meetings. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. Where the problem can come in organizations is where it's too much broadcasting of information, which is one way only, and yet they think of that as, well, we've told them all about the change, now we expect them to take it, internalize it, and take it on and run with it. There's too much of a big gap there. We're trying to do the things that, are enough to get people informed, but not enough to actually get them engaged and motivated. That takes a lot more effort, a lot more time and energy. And that's where it needs the two-way dialogue and interaction, as well as framing the communication. One big general communication at a very high level isn't enough for people to sit up and take notice. We've got to localize that messaging into in thinking about, well, what is it that is going to impact them? What's in it for them? What are their hot buttons? And really tap into that in order to then connect with that motivation and get people involved. The other thing that tends to happen is that, of course, with all of this, not all the information is available up front. There is still a lot of investigating to do and finding things out and planning. And what happens are that the people at the top or the teams involved, they sort of squirrel away. They're working hard to plan all of that out, get all this good information that they will then share with people to tell them exactly what's going on. But of course, what's happening in the meantime is we've created a vacuum. And that's where, people there will be rumours, they will be jumping to all sorts of conclusions. And trust me, those rumours that they start to spread and the things that they're imagining in their heads about this are going to be far worse than anything that, you could come up with. So it's dangerous to create that vacuum. And what we need to do is make sure that there is lots of early communication and involvement, even if it's just to say, look, this is what we're doing, along the way to find out more, and then to keep set expectations about when we can gather more information and how they can get involved with that. So moving on to the next slide. So what you've got in front of you here is we're bringing this together. We're thinking about the project management aspect, and we're also thinking more about the change life cycle as well. And you'll see from this is that as organizations, we want to be getting ready for change way before the project is actually going to deliver anything. And yet typically what happens is that the change management piece is the afterthought. And that's, of course, when you get that, complete disjoint between things, a wonderful system being delivered, and then actually people not being able to use it or not really adopting it. So what we've got here is at the top, a typical sort of project life cycle, and then the framework is based on basically Kotter's leading change model, where, saying that idea of what is the key messaging, increasing that sense of urgency and the burning platform, the why are we doing this? And getting whether it's, you want to call it the guiding coalition or the steering group or the sponsorship around it, we need that engagement and support from the sponsoring team, and we need them to be on the same page. I have very often spent time working, with those teams where actually they say they buy into it, but they've got very different ideas and perceptions of what that end result will actually look like. And of course, they've got their own agendas. So even just getting the sponsoring group and the leadership team on message and on the same page around this can take time. But if we're not going to get the consistent message communicated and filtered downwards, then how are people supposed to believe in this and really get behind this? That inconsistency at a time when people are feeling very anxious and worried anyway, just causes more harm, and it creates the resistance to change. So we really need to think about that. And of course, lots and lots of communication and empowering people to deliver. Now, what method or approach you use for delivery in this will depend on the nature of change and the environment that you're working in. So whether it's a much more traditional linear way of implementing, say, like a IT systems rollout, or whether you go a much more emergent, more agile, or lean, or even continuous improvement type approach to deliver that. I mean, that depends on the organization. But that's basically what we're doing, is implementing that change, delivering it along with the project delivery, getting people on board with it so that they will then actually use this stuff, make it stick. And again, this is where, after project delivery, it doesn't end there. the work for sustaining it, embedding change, that then goes on long after, which is why we can't rely on the project teams to do this, that integration into the business. We need to be involving the line managers, the team leaders, the supervisors at that local level. We need the change agents in place to really support the embedding of that change and nudging people along to encourage and reinforce the new behaviours that we want to see. Moving on to the next slide. And here really it's just a summary, that we've got the balancing there. And that's an important, that visual is an important reminder to say, look, we're not saying only do the people stuff, that the people stuff is more important. And we're not saying that actually, the project stuff is more important. Really, what we want is a perfect integration of those plans, the project management delivery side of it and the people side of it. In some environments, the balance will need to tip. Where there hasn't been enough of the people involvement, then we will need to do more stuff on that. Where there is a lack of good governance and good structure around the delivery, we will have to put in effort into that when we're working on a change. But as a result of that, what we want to do is get to a point where we've got an equal focus on the people and the project side, and it's integrated in order to then get things delivered. So really start to build that readiness for change, help teams prepare, people prepare, the organisation to prepare for this. And we're not talking about just one big change anymore. It's constant, and not only is it constant, there are many changes going on at the same time. So building that capability, that know-how, and the ability to be able to weave this in with the project delivery is the only way that organisations can continue to keep up with the pace of change and survive through it, not only survive, but actually thrive through it to future-proof themselves, that come, no matter what comes along, that they can actually adapt and, continue to keep adapting. So, moving on to the questions.
Right, okay, so what we did is we actually took all of your questions and we summarized them into different themes, and hopefully we will address everything that you asked. And once again, if not, you have the opportunity on the chat to ask us additional questions. So one of the questions which came in is, what do you mean by transformation? Now, the terms change management and business transformation are often used interchangeably. Usually, when we talk about transformation, this was alluded to at the beginning of the call, we mean a complex change, and this complex change will require time, experience, skills, and resources in order to be successful. So usually there's some kind of basic change to the business model or the strategy to cope with changes in the business environment, which could be internal or external, which trigger a need to change. Now, associated with that very often then is the decision, we want change management to accompany our particular project. Now, as Ranjit explained very, very thoroughly earlier in the call, ideally if you are implementing a change management initiative alongside a project, a particular project, a technical project, what tends to happen, unfortunately, is the project gets implemented and then people say, okay, now it's time for change management. Let's start with the awareness of why we are implementing this change. Ideally, when we talk about effective change management, we mean managing the people side of change alongside the technical project, and which can be connected at a certain point in time. Transformation does not necessarily have a specific start or end point, but ideally, again, all of these things should be happening in tandem for optimal effectiveness. Okay, so I'm going to turn the next question over to Ranjit now.
Thanks, Sophie. Next question we've got here is, when does change management kick in during the life cycle of a project? Again, I think we've covered that in that actually it's before the project even starts, before the project kicks in. So certainly we need to start getting ready for that. But I would go wider than that. I mean, if we're typically in an organisation that's got program management type facilities in there and governance in place, they're thinking about it at the program level. And some organisations may be thinking about it at the portfolio level as well. In the ideal world, we would have change management thinking at an enterprise level. So when the strategy, the organisational strategy is being thought about and thinking about the portfolio of everything that needs to be done in order to deliver on that strategy, that the change thinking is actually woven in from that level. But very simply, in response to that question, is it needs to be thought about before the project kicks in, when we're defining whether there should even be a project and what that project is about. Okay, over to you, Stacey.
Thank you. So the next question that came in was whether or not the change management exercise could be internalized by applying basic principles. That's actually a very interesting question, and the answer is yes, it can be. The decision to actually, the decision made about how many resources to apply to a change management initiative really depends on the size of the company, the complexity of the change, what resources are available, and so on and so forth. So if you decide, okay, we don't need an outside consultant or we don't need additional resources, we can train somebody at least to be an effective change agent and internalize this whole process of applying change management. It is possible. The only caveat I would apply there is that you still have to go through the actual methodology, meaning that there is some level of increased awareness, there is an understanding of why the changes are being made, the skills and the new abilities that need to be developed in order to make the change. All of these elements must be there, and obviously reinforcement at the end in order to make the changes stick. So thank you for that question, and Ranjit, over to you now.
Thank you. So this is about how would you manage change in an agile mode. And actually, Mirka, could I ask you to go back to slide 11 and have that up there for us? That's the slide where it's got the project management and change management.
Okay.
So the question around how would you manage it in an agile mode, and I alluded to this when I was on this slide, in that actually the way that it is delivered is very flexible. You can absolutely do it in an agile way. You could do it in a lean environment, or where there's continuous improvement or design thinking approach, which lends itself very well to change management approaches as well. So agile is very much about focusing on the business need. It's all about where is the value, what is the most important thing to the business, and then doing it in much smaller chunks, smaller phases, and working very closely with the end users or the business in an iterative way, so that rather than do the one big bang thing, it's actually in much more bite-sized chunks that are more manageable in order to get things delivered. I see this a lot, and it's a very sort of bottom-up approach, if you like. So rather than spending a very long time thinking about the very, very big change and then spending ages designing it and planning it and then rolling it out, think about this as where you've got your continuous improvement type initiatives going on, where the ideas bubble up and emerge from more locally, from the front line, where people are coming up with the ideas. So absolutely, you can still apply all the change management concepts, which is about thinking about, how do we engage people? What is the impact of this? What is the likely resistance, here? How shall we engage with people in order to get them to run with this. All of those principles apply, but just in smaller chunks, and keeping, say, the Agile principles in mind if you're thinking about Agile, but equally from a design thinking perspective as well. One of the things that I absolutely love about the design thinking is the step around the first thing is saying empathize. Now, if we were to sum up in a really simple way what change management is all about, it is, your starting point has got to be empathize. And the other thing that I would add is trust. So if you remember nothing else from this, but just take away those two words, empathizing with people's positions, and then putting all your effort into maintaining trust while all this upheaval and disruption is going on, then you can't go too far wrong with it, no matter which approach you use to deliver the change. And I do want to emphasize the trust side. I know this is slightly, a tangent to the question, but typically what happens when change is going on is we think about the surface level. Let's say we're relocating, we're giving people new systems and processes, and we're asking them to move to an open plan, way of working. So we think about all the behavior stuff and the logistics. So that's all the stuff that you can see above the surface level if you're thinking about an iceberg. What we don't think about is what is going on below the surface. And very often it is these unspoken rules that are getting broken. If people have these expectations that, look, the company will look out for me. I'm entitled to sit in this particular space or in this office next to the boss's office because I've earned the right to sit here. I've worked for all these years and I've earned this right. And there are all of these unspoken rules that suddenly get disrupted and broken when change happens. It's a psychological contract. And so much of the resistance comes about from those types of things. And so, we need to surface that and create an environment where people feel that they can trust us again. So back to that Agile way. So all of that comes into play, whether you're working in an Agile way, using Lean, continuous improvement, or design thinking. But please ask more questions around that if you'd like me to get more specific about any of those methodologies.
Okay, so we're going back now to the other questions, so just bear with me for a minute. So we've answered transformation. We've asked about internalization of change management. We've answered the question about agility. All right. This question came through: is there a threshold team size below which a change management exercise is not worth the investment? And I would say no, because again, Ranjit, you've already touched on it when you spoke about Agile methodology, and even if you say, I don't have time to do a full change management project, and change is a process, not an event, I need 6 months to do this, fine. Then keep in mind at least the principle of engagement, and as Ranjit mentioned, gaining trust. Trust builds engagement and vice versa, and empathizing with others as you're going through the changes, and at least at a minimum level, the act of applying some kind of change management methodology is always open, and it really doesn't matter if it's a personal or a professional type of change. Even when we're going through changes in our personal lives, we still apply the same thing. We have to have a desire to make the change. We need to understand what is in it for me. What skills and abilities, maybe I have to pick up a new language, maybe I have to understand the culture of another company better. All of these things still can apply, even when you want to minimize the resources applied to the desired transformation to achieve results. Okay, so the next question is already up on the screen, and I will pass that over to you, Ranjit.
Thank you. So, keeping up with the pace of change. Where do I start with this one? Okay, ideally, for change management to become a top priority for the organization, where they say, look, this is our absolute top priority, and we are going to do everything that we can do as an organisation to invest in this, invest resources, invest the time to make this happen, which is then the knowledge and know-how, building the skills, the capability, in order to have a change-ready workforce. So that's in terms of skills, but also change-ready in terms of mindset and attitude and comfort levels around change. That takes investment too. The cultural change around that is empowering people to be able to run with ideas, experiment. Now, you think about, a lot of the approaches that we talked about, like the design thinking, lean, agile, they encourage experimenting, trying things out without guarantees that what you're trying out or the prototype that you're building is going to be the perfect solution, the perfect answer to the problem that you're facing. In very safety critical environment, that's not so easy to do. So there's the cultural aspect of it as well. There's the skills and know-how, the attitude, and the willingness of leadership to not be so directive and empower people to come up with the ideas and run with them. So that's quite a lot to think about. That's the big answer anyway, about how do organisations keep up with the pace of change. And of course you can do that, to start somewhere. Just get people used to the idea of changing. But all organisations have to do this. That's the fact, in order to thrive. Okay.
All right, so let's see what else has come through in the questions. This is a very good one, actually. What is the role of my CEO in facilitating change? Well, the role of your CEO in facilitating change is the role of visible and executive sponsorship. So whichever company you're talking about, regardless of how you're structured, it's very important to lead the change in the sense of being the person who not only drives it, but communicates it in a consistent way and very often, usually 5 to 7 times before the messages are understood. So the role of the CEO really is as the visible executive sponsor, talking about the 3 critical elements for successful change. One of them is project management, as we know. The second is applying structured resources to change management. And the third is actually as a visible and executive sponsor who helps people to understand why changes are happening. Now, usually from the business side of the reasons for the change. People want to hear from their immediate supervisors about the potential personal impact of a change, but they want to hear from their CEO or their leader or their managing director about why these changes are happening and what is the business impact. CEOs also have a very critical role in engagement. If they effectively champion the need for the change, it can be seen very differently than if they do not become involved. So essentially, your CEO has to be the most visible in the whole change management effort, speaking at town hall meetings, not just communicating by email, but face-to-face, and so on and so forth. Okay, Ranjit, the next one's for you.
Sure. How can you manage resistance to change? Again, really big question. We could do a whole webinar just on this topic. But let me just go through a few of the areas, some of which we've already mentioned as well. Very often, it's around the anxiety about having to do something different, having to learn something new, and especially if they're in an environment where they feel that there will be consequences of them not being able to do this new thing. So making it safe for people to feel that they can try things out and learn, in their own way, creating that really supportive environment is really important way of dealing with that resistance. So recognizing it. People aren't going to say, oh, I'm really scared about learning this new thing. They will try and come up with really rational sounding ideas of why the change isn't a good idea. But giving them a chance to be heard and exploring, what it is that they need to get more comfortable with the idea of it is what's needed in order to start getting them more comfortable to move forward and through that change curve. So there's the anxiety side. I'd already mentioned the trust that when the psychological contract is broken, there is something underlying that is going on which is causing the resistance. So, for example, when we're talking about moving, there's one university environment we've been working with where the academics are moving from sole occupancy offices to more open plan. This is so much more than moving, from one desk to another. There's so much wrapped around egos and status and, suddenly what does this mean that, the company doesn't value me anymore and what I do and they don't understand me. And so there's a way to manage that is showing, acknowledging the fact that there is this stuff that's going on and allowing the time for that to surface and then supporting people to move past that. It is just human nature that our brains are wired to be alert to threat. Moving, so anything that causes us, gives us change, something new to think about, automatically, neuroscience shows that our brains go into alert mode. So that's obviously where some of the resistance is going to come from. And things like the uncertainty, too many knowns all at once, lack of information, and also, where they feel completely out of control, that it's all being done to them. So a way of managing the resistance that comes from that is to at least give them information and some certainty about what it is that you're doing, the steps that are being taken, the journey that you're going to go on together, to get that information. And then that sense of, well, how can you give people a say in this and the sense of control over what happens to them? Now, with regulatory change and, with these changes, yes, they absolutely need to happen. But then within that, how can you create a space where we can say, well, actually, that's the bit that you can have some say over and shape that? Like, how is that move going to happen? When is it going to happen? And so forth. So those are some of the ways to move people from, being in that very resistant space to at least being open, part through the change curve, to then being open to move forward and explore, well, what does this new world look like for me?
Okay. I've got one more question, which has come through about how can we allocate resources to the project. So we've already really touched on this. It depends on the scope of the change. So does the change affect the entire organization? Is it something where you're having different organizations coming together? Is it a part of an organization's change? Bigger projects, complexity of change, and also your expected return on investment, which includes even financially what types of gains that you expect to make, will be factors that actually guide the decision. So that's a fairly short answer, but it's the most simple one that we can give you. There was actually a question which came through as we were going through the presentation.
Yes, this question is for you, Stacey. You mentioned engagement as a change management catalyst, which is often overlooked. Can you give some examples of practical tools to increase engagement amongst employees that can be implemented at a low cost?
Okay, well, that's a fantastic question. Whoever asked that, thank you. Actually, communication is, depending on the type of communication, but that is a potential low-cost way of increasing engagement. The reason for that is that the type of communication should be tailored to the type of audience. So you will have a different type of communication coming from a CEO, for example, who wants to hold a town hall meeting, compared with a middle manager who might just be speaking with their immediate group of supervisors, compared with one-on-one coaching, compared with newsletters, compared with all types of different forms of communication. One caveat that we would mention is there should be at least some face-to-face communication. Not only is it free, but it is something which definitely builds empathy and trust, and which is a good way to facilitate engagement in the change that you're trying to make. Things like customer journey mapping, a lot of organizations use these now, and it doesn't have to be a specific high-cost tool. You can sit down on an Excel sheet or a video and identify the touch points in your organization that your customers or guests go through, and we have done this in a number of companies. Gameology is a tool that can be very high cost but also can be low cost. And coaching does not cost money, but coaching of middle managers, because they are the most resistant group, is very effective, and one-on-one coaching and even coaching of the CEO if he or she is open to that. So there are many different practical and low-cost methodologies or tools that can be used.
Thank you very much, Stacey. We also had another question coming in, but before reading it out, I would like to address our audience, our attendees. You have sent in your questions prior to this webinar, and Stacey and Ranjit have done a wonderful job answering those and giving their expertise and experience. In case these questions were not fully answered, just use the Ask a Question box underneath your video, and make sure that you submit your question so we can maybe go back to that point and be more specific. All right, and in the meantime, I will read out the question that has come in already. That is actually for both Stacey and Ranjit. Where is change management and the change management efforts heading in the Middle East, and how does it compare to the UK? So maybe Stacey, you can give some insights on the Middle East first, and then Ranjit, you can compare that to the UK.
Okay, well, that's a fantastic question, so thank you to whomever sent that in. As we talked about at the beginning of the call, we have a very multicultural workforce here, mix of leadership styles, and there's a tendency to want to have instant results. Now, in terms of change management itself, even the profession or the discipline of change management is itself changing. The pace of change is increasing, the complexity of change is increasing. If you ask any number of companies, are you going through a change or transition right now, chances are that most of them will say yes. Of course, it will depend on what type of change it is, but many companies here are going through mergers and acquisitions, are deciding that they want to become more customer-focused and so on. So I would say the discipline itself of change management is increasing what is in the toolkit to adapt to the company. So not only, agile methodology, but things like Lego serious play, as mentioned, that appears very often on LinkedIn. And people are really innovating, finding innovative ways to engage people in embracing change. Ranjit, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the UK.
Thank you, Stacey. Totally agree with everything that you've said. We certainly see that in the UK as well. And it is the sheer volume of change that comes through, and the sort of complexity of it as well, that is making the changes to the change management, or certainly the change management thinking. And exactly as you say, it's how do we keep up with that? So what tools can we use in order to work in these new fast-changing environments? So the concept of change management is the same in terms of involving people and bringing them along so that they get engaged and adopt the new thing. But it's the tools that we're using and the pace at which it has to be done, and what are these sort of when you have emergent change, how best to deal with that? Because what we're finding is that the traditional approaches to change management aren't suitable anymore. So we're at that stage where there aren't, perfect answers. it is changing and evolving and adapting to this new environment by use of new innovative tools and involving everyone, involving all disciplines in the organisation. So it's not just for organisational development people or HR or the project and programme management folk. It's actually the disciplines across the organisation who are waking up to the need to do this. And I think that's where it's becoming quite interesting with all of that input.
Thank you, Ranjit. Thank you, Stacey. Thank you for valuable information and insights this session. We have not gotten any additional questions, so I take that we were able to answer all of them for now. Thank you very much for attending our webinar. If you would like some more information on any of these issues and topics, then you can contact us at any time. There will also be a recording of this webinar available on the website and on LinkedIn. So we hope to see you next time, and for now, goodbye and thank you.